Everybody, welcome back. What we're going to do now is something a touch different from our kind of bland and traditional Ajax and jQuery examples, and I wanted to show you something a little bit different. So what you see here is Phaser. Now this is a game engine for JavaScript, and the point is not necessarily to, pivot the class to game design or even really talk about it or anything like that, but basically to show you what you can do with JavaScript and with client-side scripting. Now, in one of my older videos, I showed you refreshing the page on a WebGL animation, right? So I've got a graphics class that I'm running right now where we can do all kinds of fun stuff. Shaded cube. This looks like fun. This is all JavaScript and WebGL shaders. I've got a bump map, which kind of hard to see. Textured cube. Ooh, look at that. It's one of those massive Rubik's cubes. Particle diffusion, always fun. Mandelbrot set. If we don't want to move it out of that way, but play with fractals. Again, just JavaScript here. So Phaser is a JavaScript library for basically working with the canvas. And this is something that you'll see pretty commonly in most graphical applications. There is going to be a canvas element, or depending on what the developer wants to use, it might be like an SVG type of situation as well, where you're drawing vector graphics. But pretty commonly, it's a canvas. And you're hopefully well aware that canvas is one of our lovely HTML elements, pretty traditionally used for multimedia of some kind, whether it's video or audio or animation or something like that. But we can use JavaScript and client-side scripting to directly interact with that. And what's more fun than making a game? And I'm not going to go through the entirety of this tutorial. Like with all of these, I more so want to show you the highlights and the key points and how you would take this and extrapolate from it. But this is a nice little platformer. And it's HTML5, it's JavaScript based. I don't actually think this one even uses jQuery either. Just as a bit of an aside, if you like JavaScript but you're not super into jQuery, there's nothing wrong with using raw JavaScript. jQuery is more helper functions and helper libraries and a lot of the kind of headaches of making JavaScript cross-browser compatible. But Phaser is a layer on top. It's helping out with setting up your canvas for drawing, for sounds, and things of that nature. If you're using a keyboard or a mouse or a touch screen or a joystick because it's a gaming platform. But kind of a fun little thing. So I've got this pulled down to we're no longer in our Ajax demo anymore. cd.ls. What's in my root? That's right. I grabbed this Phaser 3 tutorial, SRC, so that's in the link. I'll show it to you. But it's basically a zip file with all the different steps. And the way Phaser works is that you have a configuration. All right, so what is your game environment going to be? Is it arcadey? Is it physics-based? What's the canvas size? What are the scene, what's the ordering that you're loading your JavaScript events in? This is kind of outside of the scope of class, obviously, but preload would be what happens when your game's loading. So do you need to load sprites, which are your characters? Do you need to load sounds? Do you need to bring anything in? Do you need to set up things, basically? We have create, which is going to create elements, and then we're going to have an update loop, which is basically our forever loop for the game actually running. If you're familiar with object-oriented programming, you probably are aware there's a forever loop, like a while true or a while one that just goes forever waiting for the user to click something. Games are the exact same. You kick it off, it runs forever until the user does something. So a lot of kind of parallels here, which is nice. Now I'm going to go ahead and unzip this. So unzip Phaser, unzip not found, because we're in Ubuntu, of course. Apt install, unzip. We don't obviously have WinZip here, or 7-zip, or WinRAR, or any of the popular ones. Let's go ahead and unzip this. Now we see a whole bunch of files, and it unzipped right into my directory. which is not a problem. But if you had put this directly into your HTML folder, you would have all these files kind of in your main area, which may or may not be fine. I don't know the exact commands for unzipping to a directory, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to sudo make dir var www html phaser, and then I'm going to see if there's anything else in here. Let's get rid of this zip file. I'm going to move everything into my phaser directory. Now, one thing to be careful if you're doing this, I know what I'm doing here. There are no other files in this directory. This command is going to move everything that's inside of my root directory. If you had other things there, you'd have to do this kind of one by one, or do some kind of a pattern match or something like that. So, ls, nothing here. Go over to our phaser directory, and we see everything here. And again, if game development's your thing, I highly recommend you follow along with their tutorial because it walks you through like each of the steps. For instance, like part 2 is loading in images, it's loading in a sprite sheet, which a sprite sheet is, where's it at? Platforms, where's the sprites? Thought it was sooner. All right, here we go. So this is a sprite sheet. Basically, it's one image that you load in rather than 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 separate images. The idea is that you save time and save memory and stuff like that. And you just kind of index into this image to grab, is he walking? Is he running? What's this character doing? So just to give you kind of a view here, let's get our game up and running. And this is /phaser. We see our directory listing. So here's part 1. We have a black screen. We just did the setup. Part 2, still just a black screen. Okay. Part 3, we should have a background. Part 4, you have some platforms. And kind of what we're getting to is the very end where everything's wrapped up is part 10. You have your little character here, some stars bouncing around. I'm using the arrow keys to move around and jump. Very cute. Walk around, collect the stars. The scene restarts once all the stars are gone, and it goes up in difficulty. And cute little game, nice way to dip your toes into game design. But again, the key here is not game design, it's the JavaScript and the client-side scripting bits, right? So I'm using my arrow keys to talk to a canvas element. And let's take a look at how this works. So Vim hearts 10. I'll just walk through this quickly and then you can go play with it on your own if you want. So we have our head block. All right, so we're going to bring in phaser.js, which is our library. So we're getting it from a content development or a delivery network, a CDN. Basic style block, and we have our body. We have our script block, a lot of JavaScript, and body, and HTML. The canvas element's going to be populated from phaser. And if we pop open our developer tools here and we click this thing, you see it is a canvas. We don't have a canvas in here anywhere. It's being automatically injected via the DOM. So let's talk through this a bit. Here's that config block that I talked about before. All right, so we've got some, again, specific things to phaser. We've got some global variables for our game objects. One thing to consider in game design, global variables are not always a bad thing. Make life a lot easier, especially if you have a simple game. Though, if you watch any of those speed runs or anything like that, you realize bit flipping and all kinds of weird things can happen with global, so teach their own. Anyway, we have our game object here. Our preload function is loading in images, and these are coming from our library. We have our create function where it's going to define the background. It's going to define the objects the player can work with. It's going to define the player. We're going to give the player some animation. So when I hit the left key, he starts walking left. When I hit the right key, he starts walking right. And when I hit up, he jumps, all that kind of fun stuff. Again, I'm glossing over all the details of Phaser because it's, its own library. But the point is, this is all in JavaScript. It's all happening on your screen. There are a lot of people that make games for the web, and this is one way that you can do that. Okay, so our setup, our create function hopefully makes sense. Also have some collision detection going on here. Player collides with the bomb. We call the hit bomb function. Player dies. It's very sad. Um, here's our forever loop. We're handling if the left key is down. If we have it kind of abstracted like this, then we can say left might be an arrow key, might be the A key, maybe it's pushing the joystick left. Maybe we're reading the internal sensors of our device and we're tilting it so that it actually goes left. Done a little abstraction here. But the key is, again, this is all JavaScript. This is all happening in a single file. It's a pretty simple game, but it's quite powerful. Anyway, key here was really to just get you to check out some different libraries that are out there. Phaser is one of them. There's also Pixie.js. There's a framework for basically any kind of game or graphics animation that you might want to make. I also mentioned my graphics class as well. So if I go back to computer graphics, I'm going to let's look at our Sierpinski gasket. This is a fractal in 3D. If I pop open the code here, get out of our preview, sources, okay, part of any good WebGL graphics application is a big application script where it's all JavaScript, right? So this is all client-side scripting. Now, again, leaving off the nitty-gritty details of how we do graphics drawing and GPU processing and all that, basically there is an application written in JavaScript that talks to our shaders, which are written in GLSL, which is shader language. Usually not that tricky. That's kind of very C-like. But again, this is all happening client-side. It's making use of your browser, and that's it. And if you wanted to add leaderboards, you'd bring in Ajax talking to a database or something like that. Anyway, point of this video is mainly to highlight other things we can do that are not just form data, having a slider, making the background change color. You can use client-side scripting for some pretty powerful things. And if you really want to go down the deep end, and you're a game developer, you can do things like Unity or Godot, are two big game development frameworks. They each have an export to HTML5 button in them. And you can take these really cool games that you make in Unity or Godot, export to the web, and now you have a client-side scripted application where all of this graphical code has been translated to basically JavaScript. Anyway, that's enough for me from this video. Otherwise, I'll keep talking about games for the next hour because I find it fun. If you don't like games, you could consider this to be graphical simulations, flow simulations, anything graphics related. Anyway, see you on the next one. Bye, everybody.